bill. Yes, I'm only a bill.
We all remember this song. It made it all seem so simple, and turns out it's not. Who writes, influences, and kills bills? It gets messy. I'm Scott Greenstone.
And I'm Libby Denkman. On Sound Politics, we tell that story, the inside track on how policy gets made in this Washington and the other one, and how it impacts you.
Listen now on the KUOW app or wherever you get your podcasts.
Washington State just passed a tax on incomes above $1 million a year.
The so-called millionaires tax has critics warning we're about to see an exodus of Washington's wealthiest residents.
There are some high-profile examples of rich people packing their bags. Jeff Bezos and Howard Schultz, we're looking at you.
Jeff Bezos posting on Instagram last night that he's leaving Seattle after nearly 30 years. He's going to move to Miami to be closer to his parents, but he's also going to save a fortune in taxes. Last year, Washington State passed a new tax on capital gains.
Starbucks founder Howard Schultz announced he and his family have moved to Florida just one day after the millionaires tax passed the House.
But beyond those headline-grabbing moves, we wanted to know whether millionaire migration is really a thing. I'm Monica Nicholsberg.
I'm Joshua McNichols, and this is Booming.
Today, what states that already have millionaire taxes can tell us about what to expect here in Washington. That's coming up.
I just had to get there by tomorrow. I'll lose $20 million.
We're going to Monaco!
Monaco?
Yes.
Now?
Yes, babe, we're going to Monaco, so then we can go to Switzerland, okay?
So, Monica, I was recently at this gathering of business leaders in downtown Seattle the other day, and the air was just buzzing with talk of this millionaires tax. I mean, this was the night when lawmakers were on the brink of passing it, so it was on everybody's mind. It was in the news. But there seemed to be these big questions in the air about whether this tax could help fund important services in Washington that have never had enough resources, or whether the tax could actually hurt us more by driving business leaders away and maybe taking some of Washington's jobs with them.
Yeah, that is the question on everybody's mind as this debate has unfolded over the past few weeks.
Yes. Okay, so let's start with the basics. How exactly does this tax work?
So this is a 9.9% tax on personal income over $1 million a year. In other words, it's an income tax that kicks in on your first dollar over $1 million.
Right.
It's expected to affect about 20,000 households in Washington state, and they think it could bring in about $3 billion a year.
Mm-hmm.
The state plans to use that money to plug budget holes, reduce some of the sales and business tax burden, and fund programs for low-income families, among other things.
Okay, so filling budget holes, reducing sales tax burden, so lowering the sales tax in some way?
On some items, on personal care items, for example.
Okay.
But lots of opponents of the tax say that it could lead to many rich people leaving the state. So I wanted to talk to somebody who studies this phenomenon to find out how likely that fear is to come true.
Okay, so who'd you find?
His name is Christabel Young, and he's kind of the millionaire migration guy. He's a professor of sociology at Cornell, and he's been studying this for almost 20 years using confidential IRS data that he gets from the Treasury Department. He's looked at all 10 states that have millionaires taxes, but I wanted to focus on Massachusetts in particular.
Why Massachusetts?
Well, its tax is really similar to Washington's. It took effect in 2023, so pretty recent. Plus, the two states just have a lot in common. They have powerful tech economies, big research universities, a lot of wealth, and a high cost of living.
Okay, so a lot of similarities. I'm looking forward to hearing what he has to say.
Christabel, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
So Washington isn't the first state to try a tax on its high earners. In 2023, Massachusetts passed a very similar, quote-unquote, millionaires tax. How has that worked out for them?
Massachusetts tax was projected to raise about $2 billion a year, and it has not. It's actually been raising closer to $2.5 billion a year. So, outperforming expectations. Why is that? It's basically that wealthy residents are not leaving this state. The number of millionaires in Massachusetts is growing. continuing. It was growing before. It's continuing to do that. And, despite this tax, there's more people entering that top tax bracket rather than fewer.
And what does that $2.5 billion go toward? What does it fund?
It was mostly earmarked to education and infrastructure. So, I think it's a really important question of what do you do with these revenues? I don't think it's one of these things where, if you raise taxes on the rich, okay, mission accomplished. It's really about what you can do with those revenues and investing in quality of life, investing in things that help people become successful in the state. Schools, infrastructure, parks, all of these things help make the state work for young professionals who one day, some of them will be paying that millionaire tax.
I know you said that millionaire migration is not happening in Massachusetts, but I really want to drill down on this because there's a lot of wealth in Washington. We're one of the top 10 states for billionaires. And we've seen some very high-profile billionaires leave the state when it passed a capital gains tax and now this income tax. So is this something that we should be concerned about?
So it's a big bundle of questions, really. But I think the short answer is, look, taxes do affect migration, but really only at the margin. And most of the time, other factors are much more important. So to start understanding this, first of all, we need to realize that millionaires actually have very low migration rates overall. Generally, the more money that people make, the less likely they are to move across state lines.
Why is that?
Yeah, well, if you think about it, so the highest migration by income, the highest migration rates are low income earners. So in the country as a whole, millionaire migration rates are 2.5%, very low. Migration rates among the poor are 5%, they're twice that migration rate. And I think that that's just because, they're struggling to find their economic footing. They're trying to find their economic place in the world. And, rich people, they've found it. They have figured out what works, and it works in their city and where they've built their career, and that's where they're doing really well. They don't really have a need to move. The working rich accumulate a lot of social capital. They have, these powerful networks of colleagues, collaborators, business partners, professional contacts, and these networks are where the action is. Now, when you move to Florida or Texas for a lower tax rate, it can be pretty disorienting to realize that you can't take your network with you. Suddenly, you're an outsider in a totally new professional environment. So people who have been really successful in their careers in a place like Washington, for them, moving to the other side of the country for a tax benefit is just not a very good deal.
So you're saying that Jeff Bezos and Howard Schultz announcing that they're moving to Florida when a capital gains tax passed or an income tax passed grabs a lot of headlines, but it's not necessarily reflective of the broader trend.
Yeah, I would not say it's reflective of the broader trend. So I can't speak to any of their personal motivations. Obviously, the Starbucks guy wanted to stir the pot with his announcement, but I would assume that he had other reasons for wanting to be in Florida. Certainly, some people are going to migrate for tax purposes. We've seen 10 other states do this, and so we know that, there's some people who do migrate for tax purposes. It's very uncommon because it's usually not worth it, but some people do. Some people are really close to the margin of already wanting to live somewhere else, and the tax is going to be an extra nudge for them. Let me give you a business metaphor. Let's do a Jeff Bezos business metaphor for how to think about this.
We love a metaphor.
Great. So look, Amazon, I noticed Amazon increased the price of its Prime subscription membership by more than 15%. Why would they do that? This is because they know some subscribers will cancel, but not very many, not enough to really hurt their business model. So Prime raises their prices. A few people will leave Amazon Prime, but the vast majority just sort of pay the higher price grumble about it. And that's why Amazon makes so much money. So millionaire taxes work in a similar way. Washington's not a business, but it does need revenue. So the tax rate on the rich goes up. Some people grumble. A few people probably will move based on the experience of other states. But, 98% of millionaires are not going anywhere.
When you say 98% of people who are subject to a tax like this stay, they don't migrate away, how do you know? Where does the data that you use in your research come from?
Yeah, so I work with confidential IRS tax return data. That's through a collaboration with the U.S. Treasury Department. So this is data on every high-income earner in the country. We're specifically studying millionaires, so people who make $1 million a year. And the data shows where these folks live, where they are filing their taxes, and it shows when and where they move to. So again, let's break down the numbers here. 2.5% of millionaires move in any given year. And of those, 15% seem to be moving for tax advantage purposes. So that's 15% of 2.5%. It's a small fraction of a small fraction. Gets you to like 0.3%. I'm sorry to be throwing these numbers, but you do need to understand, we're talking about a very small number of people that are moving for tax purposes. And, the calculation that comes out of that is, but if a typical state raised its tax rate on millionaires by 10 percentage points, which is exactly what Washington is doing, you'd expect that state would lose about 2% of its millionaires. The other 98% of its millionaires will be staying and paying that higher tax rate. So again, if you think about the business metaphor here, tell any business in the world, you can raise your prices by 10% and you'll keep 98% of your customers. That's why these taxes are so effective at raising revenue.
So one argument that opponents of this tax have made quite a bit here in Washington state is that no income tax has ever just remained on millionaires. In other words, they're going to start with this tax on the rich, but it'll be a slippery slope to an income tax on the middle class. Has that happened in Massachusetts or any of the 10 states that have passed taxes like this?
No, that's a neat line, but I don't know where they got it from. It's not based on the experience of these millionaire taxes. So New Jersey in 2004 was the first state to pass a millionaire tax, which sort of set off a trend. And, there's 10 states now that have passed them. So none of these states have subsequently lowered the threshold to make it a middle class tax bracket. So New Jersey first passed its millionaire tax in 2004. I studied that in great detail as the early example of, do rich people move away when states tax them? We didn't see migration coming out of New Jersey, and that tax has been in place now for 22 years. They've never lowered the threshold on that tax. So you can say the same thing about any of these states.
One thing that's really difficult to measure is the opportunity cost of something like a millionaire's tax. As the legend goes, Jeff Bezos built Amazon in Washington because of its low tax environment, at least in part. So could a tax like this keep a state from getting the next Amazon?
It's a fine question. I don't know if we know that story about Jeff Bezos. I would attribute the economic history of Washington to things like, a foundation in aerospace and engineering and defense contracting, and the Puget Sound as a geography. So your question is, now that there's a 10% tax rate on millionaires, will you lose the next generation of people who are starting businesses and thriving? Again, I don't think so, because it is this story of overlapping generations. Who pays these tax rates are not young people starting businesses. They're not young professionals trying to get started in their career. If you're starting a business, your odds of becoming a millionaire are very low. And that's really the last thing on your mind. The first thing on your mind is, how do we get this business going? How do we build success in this? Not what's the tax rate going to be if we achieve our highest economic aspirations.
Great. Well, Cristobal, thank you for sharing what you've learned from many years of researching this topic. It's been great talking with you.
Thank you.
Monica, I love that Amazon Prime example that he gave.
I did too. It really helps to underscore the point here.
Yeah, and it makes me think, all businesses weigh this question of how much to raise prices, how many customers they'll lose, and you see adjustments in both directions. I mean, I live near a restaurant that we love to go to, and they recently announced they're going to lower their prices because apparently they were losing too many customers.
Is it Barking Dog Ale House?
Yes, it is.
I saw that on Facebook too.
Yeah, and government in a way is kind of like a business because it has to weigh these tensions too and not turn off too many voters. I guess voters are kind of like the shareholders or whatever.
Will not shrink your tax base, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, a really interesting way to think about the tension that governments face when deciding who to tax.
Yeah, I mean, I think there are so many people in the business community who say, if only the government could be run like a business, if only we got the people who are focused on efficiency at Amazon in the state legislature. And it sounds like maybe the state is trying to take a page from their playbook.
Yeah, well, it remains to be seen what this will mean for their customer base. But I look forward to following your reporting on this going forward.
Yeah, we'll continue to keep an eye on whether the Washington state government holds on to its membership base.
Yeah.
That's it for Booming. Thanks for listening.
And, we're always looking for new story leads. And if you are a first-time home buyer and you're about to start looking for a house, I'd love to hear from you. I'm hoping to follow a couple of people and hear what their journey is like in this crazy real estate market. Go ahead and email us if you're one of those people and you'd like to participate at booming@kuow.org. Or you can leave us a voicemail at 206-221-7158. And Booming is a product of a public radio station, which means we rely on donors to do all of this great reporting and journalism that you know and love. So if you would like to donate, please go to kuow.org/booming, and we really appreciate it. Our producers are Lucy Suchek and Alec Cowan. Our editor is Carol Smith. I'm Joshua McNichols. I'm Monica Nicholsberg, and we'll catch you next time.
Are you dreading increasingly shorter days and longer nights? Do cold, overcast northwest winters bum you out? You may be suffering from the big dark, but there is a solution. I'm Dyer Oxley, telling you to talk to your podcast app about Meet Me Here, KUOW's arts podcast, a weekly dose of events and culture to lighten up your life. Side effects of Meet Me Here include laughter, curiosity, and inspiration. Find Meet Me Here on your local KUOW app or wherever you get your podcast.